Today, I'll show you all the secrets, all the details, and all the step-by-step instructions of trading supply and demand areas. In the first section, I'll talk about how to combine high time frames and low time frames for scalping. In the next session, I'll show you how to identify the key zones like breaker blocks and support resistance Phillips zones. In the final section, I'll trade with 3 minutes chart and show you what to focus on while you are trading. I love this trading style for scalping and day trading. We have so much to do. If you're ready, let's start. Welcome our free trading course, all about price action trading strategies and smart money concepts. Why do we trade prices? Because the price is the only real-time indicator that you can get. Price action is usable for cryptocurrencies, Forex, commodities, and futures. If you are looking for a structured table of contents, I set it up for you. You can find it on Google Drive or directly from my website, which is in the description. And please, try to watch videos in order. Otherwise, it can be really confusing. The way I took this trade was more like scalping rather than day trading. I quickly got in and out. My high time frame was 10 minutes for this chart. As I said before, price action is universal. It works the same as with all the time frames. It does not matter if you trade monthly charts or 1 minute charts. The first thing I was looking for is if the price is expensive to short or cheap to buy. I mostly look for short trades nowadays. So, I look for premium zones to short the assets. The second thing I looked for was any recent stop-loss hunts. And the easiest way to determine liquidity hunts is using swing failure pattern, one of my favorite price action trading pattern. As you can see, there is SFP right here. However, after that, there were equal highs. But if you really look closely, these equal highs was actually also a kind of swing failure pattern. However, this is kind of a gray area, not black or white. I can call these equal highs and SFP at the same time, a tricky price action. Then the next thing you should check for is any supply or demand zones around, which price may react to. As you can see, we have an order block here. However, it did not work at all. Price pierced through this demand, and this order block became the breaker block, a supply and demand flip. This sharp fall leaves giant imbalances behind. As I always say, if the price action structures come together one after another, it makes the area much stronger. This was a great area to start looking for shorts. Why? It is in the premium zone, it has the breaker block, it has the large imbalance. These are great signs and breadcrumbs for us that market maker leaves behind. Now, what I noticed was that the price was leaving swing failure patterns behind. It was dropping while hunting some liquidity. Then I noticed this nice SR Phillip area, and the price kept reacting to this price level. I actually do not care if the reactions are upwards or downwards. I mostly look for how many times a price reacts to a price level. Once I saw a break here, I considered this is a great sign to go lower time frames and look for a quick scalp entry. But a big warning, when you become an experienced trader, you can see all the dangers much before they happen. You can notice the downtrend liquidity is gathering here. Price was going to claim these stop-loss orders here. I witnessed these types of movements thousands of times after trading for years. I also actually traded these stop-loss hunts. The price went above and claimed all these liquidity zones and filled the imbalance before another big fall. However, I will talk about that trade in another video. Let's get back to this trade. Once I find a point of interest, I immediately think about where the price may react and where are the good targets that I can take my profits. I immediately noticed this bullish support and resistance Philip area. Price was reacting to this area a lot. There was also a giant imbalance here. If I was looking for a long trade, this would be my entry spot. Nice SR flip, nice imbalance, huntable downtrend liquidity area above. Okay, let's open low time frames and check how I scalped this area. I did not hold this trade long because I was really afraid of downtrend liquidity above. If I'm scared of anything while I trade, it is definitely liquidity zones. Once you open low time frames and scalp, you have to focus on what is happening in front of you. The most recent price action is what matters the most. In this 3 minutes chart, you can see the price making a considerable swing failure pattern and a general downtrend. Price is having a hard time making high quality bullish breakouts. Now, I want you to tell me where is the drop base drop, which creates a great supply area for us. Please pause the video and take your time to identify it. As you can see, it is right here. A sharp and strong drop, and then a consolidation zone, and another sharp break, a high quality break. This is my drop base drop supply zone. But why? Let's look closely and see what is inside the drop base drop area. You can notice the order block right here. Right behind it, there is a nice imbalance. Our old friend, the dragon fruit combo, the best entry point. What I did for this trade was really simple. I set a stop limit order right below the imbalance. This was a perfect fill and perfect entry. My stop loss was right above the order block because I was scared of those downtrend liquidity gathering from the high time frames. My target was really easy, the area that I determined from the high time frame. Once the price hit my target, I took the profit and closed the trade. This was a nice and clean trade. Later on, as I expected, the price reacted to this SR Philip area, an imbalance, and powered up to clean the stop losses above. If your intention is being a scalper or trading really low time frames, the first thing you should do is work on your targets. You have to find clear targets and take your profits, otherwise you'll be the liquidity for market makers and pro traders. Scalping is the hardest section of trading, and scalpers are the biggest fuel of the market makers. Okay folks, we completed the basics of rally-based rally and drop-based drop for day trading and scalping. This is a very common supply and demand trading strategy in the trading world, even for swing trades. You can use it in your trading life as a day trader or scalper. I hope you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you, please take care and see you soon.